My mother's words cut through the candlelit dining room like a blade. "You're nothing without us, Serafina. Nothing." The entire family nodded in agreement around our mahogany table. My father smirked. My brother rolled his eyes. My sister-in-law whispered something cruel to my golden child brother Marcus. They all thought I was the family failure, the one who'd never amount to anything. I smiled sweetly, pulled out my phone, and made one call. 24 hours later, their world would crumble completely. Before we dive into how I brought down my entire toxic family empire, tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever dealt with family members who underestimated you? Smash that like button if you're ready for some serious family karma, and subscribe because this revenge story has more twists than a soap opera. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. The Blackwood family looked perfect from the outside. My father, Richard Blackwood, owned a successful construction company that had been building luxury homes across Connecticut for 30 years. My mother, Patricia, played the devoted wife while secretly managing the family finances with an iron fist. My older brother, Marcus, was the golden boy who supposedly helped run the business, and his wife, Jessica, was the perfect daughter-in-law who could do no wrong. Then there was me, Serafina Blackwood, the disappointment, the black sheep, the one who chose to become a forensic accountant instead of joining the family business like a good daughter should. Growing up, I was constantly reminded of my place in the family hierarchy. Every family dinner was a performance where I played the role of the failure, while everyone else basked in their supposed success. My parents would brag about Marcus taking over the business someday, about Jessica's perfect homemaking skills, about how proud they were of their real children. The irony was delicious considering what I actually did for a living. While they saw me as some pencil-pushing nobody, I spent my days unraveling financial crimes for law enforcement agencies. I had clearance to access financial records that would make most people's heads spin. I could track money through offshore accounts, find hidden assets, and expose fraud schemes that seemed impossible to detect. But my family never bothered to ask about my work. They assumed forensic accounting was just playing with numbers for some boring government job. They had no idea I'd helped bring down million-dollar embezzlement schemes, Ponzi operations, and corporate fraud rings that made national news. The dinner that changed everything happened on a cold February evening. My parents had insisted on their monthly family gathering, which was really just an excuse for them to show off and make me feel small. This particular night, they'd been especially cruel. "Sarah's still living in that tiny apartment," my mother had announced to the table like it was breaking news. Can you imagine, at 32 years old, still renting like a college student? "Well, some people just don't have what it takes to build wealth," my father added, cutting his perfectly prepared steak. "It requires vision, business sense, real intelligence." Marcus laughed. "At least she has a job, I guess, even if it's just shuffling papers for the government." Jessica, his wife, had smiled that fake, sweet smile of hers. "Oh, Patricia, I'm sure Sarah is doing her best. Not everyone can be as blessed as we are." That's when my mother delivered the killing blow. "You're nothing without us, Serafina. Nothing." The words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone expected me to shrink to apologize to play my assigned role as the family disappointment. Instead, something inside me snapped. You see, for the past 6 months, I'd been noticing something strange. My forensic training had kicked in during casual conversations about the family business, little inconsistencies in their stories. Numbers that didn't quite add up. Projects that Marcus claimed to be managing but couldn't describe in detail. I'd started paying closer attention during these family dinners, listening not as their disappointed daughter, but as the forensic accountant I'd become. And what I'd heard had made my professional instincts scream. So when my mother called me nothing, I smiled. Not the fake smile I'd perfected over years of family abuse, but a real smile. The smile of someone who'd just realized they held all the cards in a game where everyone else thought they were playing with a stacked deck. I pulled out my phone with deliberate slowness, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. My family watched with curious expressions, probably expecting me to call an Uber to flee in shame, like I'd done so many times before. Instead, I dialed a number I'd memorized months ago, but had hoped never to use. Agent Morrison, this is Serafina Blackwood. I need to report a federal crime. The look on my family's faces was priceless. Confusion, then concern, then outright fear, as they realized I wasn't making some dramatic empty threat. I have evidence of systematic tax evasion, money laundering, and construction fraud involving Blackwood Construction Company. I'm ready to provide full documentation and testimony. That's when the shouting started. The chaos that erupted in that dining room was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. My father's face went white, then red, then purple as he processed what I'd just said. My mother's perfect composure cracked like expensive china hitting marble floor. Hang up that phone right now, my father bellowed, lunging across the table toward me. But I was already standing, phone still pressed to my ear, speaking calmly to Agent Morrison. Yes, I can meet tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. works perfectly. Marcus grabbed my wrist, his golden boy facade melting away to reveal something uglier underneath. What the hell do you think you're doing, Sarah? You can't just... Let go of me, I said quietly, my voice carrying a steel that none of them had ever heard before. Unless you want to add assault to your growing list of problems. Jessica had gone completely silent, her face pale as she stared at me like I'd just sprouted horns. My mother was hyperventilating into her cloth napkin. You don't know what you're talking about, my father said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. You're just upset because we hurt your feelings. This is ridiculous. I hung up the phone and looked around the table at my family. These people who had spent decades making me feel worthless, who had convinced me that I was lucky they even tolerated my presence at their gatherings. Let me tell you what I know, I said, my voice steady and professional. I know that Blackwood Construction has been reporting significantly lower revenue than you've actually been earning. I know because I've been watching your lifestyle, Dad. The new Porsche every year, the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, Mom's jewelry collection that costs more than most people's houses. My father tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I know that you've been paying workers under the table to avoid taxes and workers' compensation requirements. I know because Marcus got drunk at Christmas and bragged about how you save money by hiring undocumented immigrants and paying them in cash. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I know that you've been inflating material costs on your contracts and pocketing the difference. I know because Jessica posted photos of your house renovation on social media, and I recognized materials that were supposed to go to the Morrison Beach Development Project. Jessica actually whimpered. But most importantly, I continued walking slowly around the table like a prosecutor addressing a jury. I know that you've been laundering money through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, the same shell company that's been buying properties you renovate and then selling them back to yourselves at inflated prices. The silence was deafening. My mother was crying now, actual tears running down her carefully made-up face. How? My father whispered. How could you possibly know about... Because I'm a forensic accountant, Dad. It's literally my job to uncover financial crimes. Did you think I was too stupid to notice what was happening in my own family's business? I pulled out my tablet and opened a file I'd been building for months. Screenshots of bank records I'd legally accessed through public databases, photos of documents Marcus had carelessly left around during family gatherings, recorded conversations where they'd discussed their illegal activities thinking I was too unimportant to worry about. Every family dinner, every casual conversation, every time you bragged about your success while calling me a failure, you were confessing to federal crimes, and I was documenting every single word. The transformation in the room was complete. The people who had spent my entire life making me feel powerless were now looking at me with fear, respect, and something that might have been actual recognition for the first time ever. "This is what nothing looks like," I said, echoing my mother's earlier words. "This is what failure looks like. This is what it means to have no power, no control, and no way out." My father tried one last desperate play. "Sarah, sweetheart, you're family. We're family. We can work this out. Whatever you think we've done, I don't think, Dad, I know. And tomorrow morning, the FBI will know too." That's when Marcus made his biggest mistake. He stood up, his face twisted with rage, and took a step toward me. "You ungrateful little—" "Careful, Marcus," I said softly. "Everything you say right now is being recorded." I showed them my phone, which had been running a recording app since the moment my mother had called me nothing. "Agent Morrison will be very interested in hearing how you react to being exposed. Threatening a federal witness is a serious crime all by itself." The fight went out of all of them at once. My father sank into his chair like a deflated balloon. My mother was sobbing openly now. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick, and Jessica was already pulling out her own phone, probably calling a lawyer. 24 hours, I said, gathering my purse and coat. "That's how long you have before this becomes public record. I suggest you use that time wisely." I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at my family one last time. "Oh, and Mom, you were wrong about one thing. I'm not nothing without you. I'm everything I am because I chose to be better than you." The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like justice. Walking out of that house felt like shedding a skin I'd been trapped in my entire life. But as the cool February air hit my face, reality set in. I'd just declared war on my own family, and they had resources I couldn't match. They had lawyers' connections and decades of experience covering their tracks. What I had was evidence training and something they'd never possessed: integrity. The next morning, I sat across from Agent Morrison in a sterile FBI conference room, my laptop open and my files organized like the professional I'd become. Morrison was exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversations: sharp-eyed, no nonsense, and completely focused on facts. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to know this isn't some kind of family dispute that got out of hand. Are you absolutely certain about what you're alleging?" I opened my first file folder. "Agent Morrison, I've spent 6 months building this case using publicly available information, legally obtained financial records, and documentation that my family provided voluntarily during conversations they initiated." I spread out bank statements, construction contracts, and timeline documents I'd created. Blackwood Construction has been operating a sophisticated fraud scheme for at least 7 years. They've evaded approximately $4.2 million in federal taxes, violated labor laws affecting over 300 workers, and committed mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Morrison's eyebrows went up. $4.2 million. "Conservative estimate," I said. "I believe the actual number is closer to 6 million, but I can prove 4.2 with absolute certainty." I walked him through every detail. How my father had established the shell company in the Caymans using Marcus's name, but my father's signature. How they'd been reporting cash payments to workers as material costs to reduce their tax liability. How they'd been overcharging clients for materials they'd already purchased at bulk discounts. The beauty of their scheme, I explained, was that it looked legitimate from any single angle. The problem is, they got greedy and careless. They started living far beyond their reported income, and they couldn't resist bragging about their cleverness. Morrison took notes steadily, occasionally asking clarifying questions that proved he understood the complexity of what I was showing him. "What made you start investigating your own family?" he asked during a break. I'd been dreading this question, but I owed him honesty. "Initially, it was self-defense. They spent my whole life telling me I was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything. But when I started succeeding in my career, really succeeding, they couldn't handle it. The put-downs got worse, more vicious." I paused, remembering years of family dinners that felt like trial proceedings, where I was always found guilty. "About a year ago, I realized I was using my professional skills to analyze their claims about their business success. The numbers didn't match their lifestyle. As a forensic accountant, inconsistencies like that are red flags. I couldn't just ignore them. So, you started investigating. I started paying attention, I corrected. Everything I documented came from information they freely shared. They were so convinced I was too stupid to understand their business that they talked about illegal activities right in front of me. Morrison nodded slowly. That explains the quality of your evidence. Usually financial crimes this sophisticated take months to unravel. You've already done most of our work. Over the next 4 hours, we went through every piece of documentation I'd collected. Bank transfers that coincided with project completions. Photos Jessica had posted showing expensive materials in their home that matched missing inventory from job sites. Text messages Marcus had sent bragging about dodging labor inspectors. There's something else, I said as we neared the end of our session. I think they're planning to destroy evidence. When I left last night, Jessica was making phone calls, and my father was already looking panicked. Morrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. Actually, we might have a problem. We just received a call from your father's attorney requesting a meeting. They want to discuss misunderstandings regarding the family business. My stomach dropped. They're getting ahead of the story. Probably. But thanks to your documentation, we have enough to move forward regardless. However, I need to ask you something difficult. I braced myself. Are you prepared to testify against your family in federal court? Are you prepared for them to hire the best defense attorneys money can buy and have them attack your credibility, your motives, and your relationship with your family? The question hit harder than I'd expected. Despite everything they'd done to me, despite years of emotional abuse and manipulation, they were still my family. The idea of sitting in a courtroom and watching them be sentenced to federal prison was overwhelming. But then I thought about all the workers they'd cheated out of fair wages, all the taxes they'd evaded while people like me struggled to pay our fair share, all the clients they'd defrauded who trusted them to be honest. Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared. Morrison smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Good, because we're going to need you to wear a wire. The blood drained from my face. What? Your father's attorney wants to meet tomorrow. They're probably going to try to convince you to recant your statement, maybe offer you money to disappear. We need to know what they're willing to say when they think no one's listening. I thought about facing my family again this time, wearing recording equipment, pretending to be the same weak person they'd always believed I was. They'll expect me to cave, I said slowly. They'll expect me to apologize and beg for forgiveness. Probably. Can you handle that? I smiled, remembering the look on my mother's face when I'd walked out the night before. Agent Morrison, I've been acting like their disappointment my entire life. I think I can manage one more performance. That afternoon, I went home to my small apartment that my family had mocked so many times. But as I sat in my kitchen, looking at my forensic accounting certifications on the wall and the commendations I'd received for my work, I felt something I'd never experienced before. I felt proud of who I was, not despite my family, but in spite of them. My phone rang around 6 p.m., my father's number. Hello, Dad? Sarah. His voice was strained, exhausted. We need to talk. Do we, please, come to the house tomorrow evening, 7 p.m.? We can work this out like a family. The old Sarah would have heard hope in those words. The new Sarah heard desperation. I'll be there, I said. As I hung up, I realized I wasn't lying. I would be there, but not as their victim. This time, I'd be there as the agent of their justice. The next evening, I sat in my car outside my childhood home, adjusting the tiny recording device Agent Morrison had fitted under my blouse. My hands were steadier than I'd expected, but my heart was racing. Through the living room windows, I could see my entire family gathered, along with 2 men in expensive suits who could only be lawyers. "Testing, testing," I whispered, and Morrison's voice crackled softly in my nearly invisible earpiece. "We hear you perfectly, Serafina. Remember, let them talk. The more they say, the deeper they dig themselves." I walked up the familiar front steps, noting how different everything looked now that I saw it through the lens of criminal proceeds. The marble facade, the custom ironwork, the perfectly manicured landscaping that cost more than most people's annual salaries. All of it paid for with stolen money. My father opened the door before I could knock. His face was haggard, aged years in the single day since our last conversation. "Sarah, sweetheart, thank you for coming." The endearment felt like acid in my ears, but I forced a neutral expression. "Dad?" Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My mother sat rigidly on the leather sofa that had cost $40,000. Marcus paced near the fireplace like a caged animal, while Jessica perched on the arm of his chair, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. The two lawyers stood as I entered. The older one, distinguished with silver hair, and a smile that probably cost $500 an hour, stepped forward. "Miss Blackwood, I'm Harold Westfield from Westfield Morrison and Associates. This is my colleague David Park. We represent your family's business interests." I shook their hands, noting how Westfield's grip lingered just a moment too long, a power play that might have intimidated the old Sarah. "Please sit," Westfield said, gesturing to a chair that had clearly been positioned to face everyone else. "We understand there's been some confusion about certain aspects of your family's business operations." "Confusion?" I repeated, settling into the chair. "Well," Park jumped in, his voice smooth as silk. "Sometimes financial records can be interpreted in ways that might seem irregular to someone without extensive business experience. What might look like impropriety to an outsider often has perfectly legitimate explanations." I could practically hear Agent Morrison grinding his teeth through my earpiece. These lawyers were good already, laying groundwork for reasonable doubt. "Your family loves you very much, Sarah," Westfield continued. "They're concerned that perhaps your emotional response to some family tensions might have colored your interpretation of routine business practices." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "We never meant to make you feel excluded, darling. We thought we were protecting you from the stress of the business world." It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't spent months documenting their crimes, I might have actually believed them. "The thing is," my father said, his voice carefully modulated, "we understand you've spoken to some federal agents about your concerns. We appreciate your thoroughness, but we think there might be a way to resolve this privately." Here it comes, I thought. Westfield opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick document. "Your family wants to offer you a position in the company, Sarah. A real position with real responsibility. Chief Financial Officer with a starting salary of $300,000 annually." My breath caught. $300,000 was nearly triple what I made at my government job. "Additionally," Park continued, "they'd like to provide you with a signing bonus of $500,000 and immediate access to the family trust fund that was always intended for you." Jessica leaned forward. "Sarah, we know we haven't always been fair to you. This is our chance to make things right." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "You could move out of that tiny apartment, get a real house, finally live the life you deserve." The old Sarah, the one who had spent her entire life craving their acceptance, felt a powerful pull toward their offer. $500,000, a place in the family business, everything I'd ever wanted them to give me. But the forensic accountant in me immediately understood what this really was: a bribe. They were offering me money stolen from taxpayers and defrauded from clients to buy my silence about their crimes. "This is very generous," I said carefully, and I could feel the relief ripple through the room. "There is one small administrative detail," Westfield said, his tone casual. "We'd need you to sign a statement clarifying that your conversations with federal agents were based on misunderstandings. Nothing more than family miscommunication that's now been resolved." "A retraction," I said. "Exactly. Just a simple clarification that there's been no criminal activity, no intentional wrongdoing, just some bookkeeping complexities that might have appeared irregular to someone unfamiliar with construction industry standards. I stared at the contract they'd placed in front of me. The numbers were staggering. With this money, I could buy a house, travel the world, never worry about student loans again. All I had to do was betray everything I believed in. I need a moment to think, I said. My family exchanged glances that they thought were subtle. My mother's fake tears had stopped, replaced by barely contained hope. Of course, my father said. Take your time. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the backyard, where I'd played as a child, where I'd dreamed of someday making my family proud. Behind me, I could hear whispered conversations between the lawyers and my parents. That's when I heard Park's voice, low but clear. The federal case falls apart without her testimony. The other evidence is circumstantial at best. My blood went cold. Are you certain? My mother whispered. Absolutely, Westfield replied. Morrison has a competent team, but they're building their case around her documentation. Without her cooperation, they have nothing that would hold up in court. Marcus's voice was bitter. So, we just have to pay off our own daughter to save ourselves. Small price to pay to avoid federal prison, Park said matter-of-factly. I felt something break inside my chest. Even now, even when they needed me desperately, they saw giving me money as paying me off. Not as finally recognizing my worth, not as welcoming me into the family, but as purchasing my silence, like they'd purchase any other commodity. Agent Morrison's voice whispered in my ear. Sarah, we're getting this all on record. This is perfect evidence of obstruction and witness tampering. But I barely heard him. I was staring at my reflection in the window, seeing clearly for the first time who my family really was and who I had always been. I turned around to face them. I've made my decision. The hope in their eyes was pathetic and desperate. Keep your money, I said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Sarah, my father started, but I held up my hand. I don't want your dirty money. I don't want a place in your criminal enterprise. And I definitely don't want to be part of a family that thinks love can be bought and sold. Westfield's professional mask slipped. Miss Blackwood, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The consequences of proceeding with unfounded allegations could be severe. Are you threatening me, counselor? I'm advising you that making false statements to federal agents is itself a federal crime. I smiled, pulling out my phone and stopping the recording app I'd been running in addition to the FBI wire. Good thing my statements aren't false then. That's when everything went sideways. The room erupted in chaos. My father lunged toward me, his face purple with rage. Marcus started shouting about family loyalty. Jessica burst into tears, but this time they looked real. The lawyers were frantically whispering into their phones, probably calling their own lawyers. But through my earpiece, I heard Agent Morrison's calm voice. Sarah, stay exactly where you are. We're coming in. Within 60 seconds, the front door burst open. Agent Morrison led a team of 6 federal agents into our family living room, their badges gleaming under the crystal chandelier that my family had bought with stolen money. Nobody move, Morrison announced. This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The transformation was immediate and complete. My powerful father became a trembling old man. My golden brother looked like he was about to faint. The lawyers who had been so confident moments before were now frantically calculating how to distance themselves from their clients. Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for tax evasion, money laundering, and wire fraud, Morrison said, producing handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As he read my father his rights, another agent approached Marcus. Marcus Blackwood, you're also under arrest. Jessica started hyperventilating as they cuffed my brother. My mother sat frozen on her expensive sofa staring at nothing. Mrs. Blackwood, a female agent said gently, you're not under arrest at this time, but we'll need you to remain available for questioning. Westfield, the family's lawyer, was frantically trying to establish attorney-client privilege, but Morrison cut him off. Counselor, based on what we just recorded, you and your colleague are now witnesses to obstruction of justice and witness tampering. I suggest you contact your own representation. As the chaos swirled around me, I felt a strange calm settle over my shoulders. This was really happening. After years of being treated like I was worthless, I had brought down my entire family's criminal empire. But the story wasn't over. Agent Morrison, I said quietly, there's something else you need to know. He looked at me with concern. What is it? The shell company in the Caymans isn't the only one. There are 3 others, and I think I know who's been helping them manage the offshore accounts. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken months ago at a family barbecue. In the background of a seemingly innocent family photo was my Uncle Stephen, my father's brother, talking intently with a man I'd later identified as a known money laundering specialist. Stephen Blackwood isn't just my uncle. He's been the architect of this entire operation. My father and Marcus were the frontmen, but Stephen has been running sophisticated financial crimes through his accounting firm for over a decade. Morrison's eyes went wide. How long have you known this? I've suspected for months, but I could never prove it. Stephen is careful, much more careful than my father. But tonight, when the lawyers were so confident they could make the federal case disappear, I realized someone with serious expertise had to be advising them. I showed him financial records I'd been analyzing. Stephen's firm handles the books for 17 construction companies across 3 states. If the pattern here is repeated across all his clients, we're looking at a conspiracy that involves over $50 million in federal crimes. The room had gone quiet around us. Even my father, who was now sitting in handcuffs, was listening to what I was saying. There's more, I continued. Stephen's daughter Rachel works for the IRS. I think she's been providing inside information about audits and investigations. Morrison looked like Christmas morning had arrived early. Can you prove any of this? Not yet, but I know where to look, and I know how Stephen thinks. Give me access to his firm's financial records through proper legal channels, and I can map the entire network. That's when my father spoke for the first time since being arrested. You don't know what you're doing, Sarah, he said, his voice broken. Stephen isn't just running money laundering operations. He's connected to people who don't solve problems with lawyers and accountants. Ice ran through my veins. What do you mean? My mother looked up from her stupor, fear replacing shock in her eyes. Your uncle has been laundering money for some very dangerous people, Sarah. Construction was just the legitimate front. Agent Morrison stepped closer to my father. Mr. Blackwood, are you telling us that your brother has connections to organized crime? My father laughed bitterly. Organized crime, drug cartels, arms dealers. Stephen's firm is a washing machine for dirty money from all over the world. You think our little tax evasion scheme was bad? That was nothing compared to what Stephen does. The magnitude of what I'd stumbled into was staggering. I'd thought I was exposing my family's fraud. Instead, I'd uncovered a thread that led to a massive criminal network. Agent Morrison, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. I want to finish this. All of it. He studied my face carefully. Sarah, what your father is describing. These aren't people who solve problems through the legal system. If you help us take down a network that size, you'll need federal protection for the rest of your life. I looked around the room at my family. My father slumped in handcuffs. My brother terrified and defeated. My mother finally seeing the consequences of the life they'd chosen. None of them had ever protected me from anything. They'd spent my entire life making me feel small and worthless. Now they were asking me to protect them from the consequences of their own crimes. Agent Morrison, I said clearly, I'll testify against my Uncle Stephen. I'll help you take down his entire network, and I'll do it because it's the right thing to do, not because these people deserve my loyalty. My mother started crying again, but this time I felt no sympathy for her tears. There's something else, I said, remembering a detail that had bothered me for months. Rachel Blackwood Stevens' daughter, who works for the IRS, she's been dating a federal prosecutor for the past 2 years, Assistant United States Attorney Michael Porter. Morrison's face went white. Porter's been handling financial crimes cases in this district, including cases that might have touched Stevens' clients, I said. I think the corruption goes deeper than we know. The scope of the criminal network I'd uncovered was staggering, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I had real power. Not the power that comes from money or family connections, but the power that comes from doing the right thing, regardless of the cost. Let's bring them all down, I said. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse, watching my uncle Stephen Blackwood receive a 25-year sentence for operating a criminal enterprise that had laundered over $80 million through his accounting firm. The courtroom was packed with FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and journalists covering what had become the largest financial crimes case in Connecticut's history. My testimony had been the keystone that brought down not just my family, but an entire network of corrupt officials, money launderers, and criminal enterprises that had operated with impunity for over 15 years. Stephen's daughter Rachel received 12 years for her role in providing inside IRS information. The federal prosecutor she'd been dating got 8 years for obstruction of justice. My father was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Marcus got 7 years. The businesses were liquidated, their assets seized to pay restitution to the workers they'd cheated and the taxes they'd evaded. My mother, who had cooperated fully with investigators, received 3 years of house arrest and community service. She'd lost everything: her house, her cars, her jewelry, her social standing. But she was still alive, which was more than could be said for 2 potential witnesses who had mysteriously disappeared before they could testify about Stephen's connections to organized crime. As I walked out of the courthouse that final day, Agent Morrison caught up with me on the steps. "You know," he said, "in 20 years with the Bureau, I've never seen a single witness bring down a criminal network this large. The ripple effects from your testimony are still uncovering corruption in 3 different states." I smiled, feeling the warm sunshine on my face. It wasn't about bringing anyone down, Agent Morrison. It was about standing up for what's right. What's next for you? That was the question I'd been asking myself for months. The federal government had offered me a substantial reward for my cooperation money that would set me up for life. But I'd declined it. Blood money, even legally obtained, still felt like blood money. "I'm starting my own forensic accounting firm," I said, "specializing in helping workers who've been cheated by their employers and small businesses that have been defrauded by corrupt contractors." Morrison grinned. "Going to put people like your family out of business." "People like my family put themselves out of business. I'm just going to help their victims get justice." As we talked, I noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the courthouse plaza. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a financial crimes professor at Yale who had followed the case closely and had testified as an expert witness during the trials. "Serafina," she called out, extending her hand. "I've been hoping to catch you. I have a proposition." Dr. Martinez had become something of a mentor during the long months of trials and testimony. She was everything I wished my mother had been: brilliant, ethical, supportive, and proud of my accomplishments. "I'm developing a new program at Yale," she said, "a joint law and accounting degree focused on financial crimes investigation. I want you to be our first graduate student, and eventually I'd like you to consider teaching." The offer was tempting, but I'd already made my decision. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez, but I have other plans." The forensic accounting firm. That's part of it, but there's something else. I pulled out a business card I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment to make it real. Blackwood Justice Services. We're going to specialize in helping people who've been victimized by white-collar criminals. Workers who've been cheated, families who've been defrauded, small businesses that have been destroyed by corruption. Dr. Martinez read the card and smiled. You're keeping the family name? I'm reclaiming it, I said. For 32 years, the Blackwood name has been associated with corruption and crime. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it stand for justice instead. Agent Morrison nodded approvingly. You know the Bureau could use consultants with your skills and experience. Already thought of that, I said. I'm planning to donate 20% of my firm's profits to a fund that provides legal services to workers who've been exploited by employers. Another 20% will go to supporting families of federal agents who've been injured in the line of duty. As we stood there on the courthouse steps, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete peace with who I was and what I'd accomplished. My biological family had spent my entire life trying to convince me I was worthless, but they'd been wrong. I'd found my real family among the agents, prosecutors, and advocates who fought for justice every day. You know what the best part is? I said, looking back at the courthouse where my family's crimes had finally been exposed. What's that? Dr. Martinez asked. When my mother told me I was nothing without them, she was absolutely right. I was nothing like them, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. 3 years later, Blackwood Justice Services had grown to include 12 employees and had recovered over $6 million for workers and families who'd been victimized by financial crimes. We'd helped expose corruption in 8 different companies and had assisted federal investigations in 4 states. I never spoke to my father or Marcus again. They were still in federal prison, and I had nothing left to say to them. But my mother and I had developed a strange, cautious relationship. She'd lost everything, but in the process, she'd gained something she'd never had before: honesty. I'm proud of you, she told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. I should have said that 30 years ago, but I'm saying it now. It was too little too late for us to have a real mother-daughter relationship, but it was enough for me to forgive her, if not forget. The most important thing I'd learned through everything was that family isn't about blood or DNA or shared last names. Family is about people who support you, believe in you, and stand with you when everything falls apart. Agent Morrison and his wife invited me to their daughter's graduation. Dr. Martinez and I co-authored a textbook on financial crimes investigation that became a standard in law schools across the country. My employees at Blackwood Justice Services became the siblings I'd always wished I'd had. I built the family I'd always wanted, one relationship at a time, with people who valued justice over money and integrity over convenience. And every morning when I walk into my office and see the Blackwood name on the door, I smile. Not because it reminds me of where I came from, but because it represents everything I chose to become. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you weren't who you thought they were? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes, the hardest thing about seeking justice is realizing it might cost us the relationships we thought mattered most. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they think, and that sometimes the family that matters most is the one you choose for yourself. Thank you for watching, and remember, you're never nothing when you choose to stand for something. The people who truly matter will always support you for doing what's right, even when it's difficult. That's the real lesson I learned from bringing down my own family's criminal empire. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about choosing integrity over convenience, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted.